Once you're satisfied with your mix, you'll most likely want to share it with others, or at least have a copy for yourself that you can play or burn to a disk outside of FL Studio. FL Studio gives you several options for exporting your mix project, and you can choose the method and file format that works best for what you intend to do with the file. So let's say I'm happy with the mix as it is, or maybe I just want to create a rough mix and review it and come back later. I'll choose File, Export, and here we find several options. Let's run through them. Zipped loop package is for when you want to back up or archive your entire project so you can open it up and continue editing it in FL Studio at another time. Basically, this zips up the FLP file, which is the FL Studio file format, along with a folder containing all the samples that you might have used. This is also a good way to send the file to someone else to work on in their copy of FL Studio. But of course, this requires you to have FL Studio in order to open it. So again, this option is for backing up your entire project with the intention of being able to open it up and work on it again. Next is the WAV format. WAV files are uncompressed files that can be played on any PC or Mac. Use this format to generate a single file of your mix that you can then burn to a CD or convert to an MP3 using conversion software of your choice. Or if you like, you can export an MP3 directly from here. MP3, of course, is still probably the most used audio format in the world, and it can be opened by just about any audio application on any computer. It's a compressed format that still sounds good, but it gives you a smaller file size, so it's useful if you want to email your song to someone. OGG is short for Ogg Vorbis, which is another semi-popular audio file format. OGG is an open source format that many people swear by, but it can't usually be played in many audio apps without plugins or special software. We also have a MIDI file option, but you'd only choose this if your project is all beats, keyboards, or other MIDI parts. MIDI doesn't save any audio or sounds, it's purely data, so you might choose this option if you wanted to bring your MIDI data into another MIDI app. Project Bones is for exporting all the effects settings your project uses as presets and all the automation data as score files, which you might want to do if you want to merge components from one project into another. And Project Data Files saves copies of all of your samples, your presets, and other plugin data into a single folder. For the most part, though, you'll most likely be choosing either WAV or MP3 from here most of the time, depending on whether you want to export an uncompressed or compressed version of your project. Now, both of these have a couple of settings you can play around with. I'll choose WAV. Now I'm prompted to pick a location to save the file. I'll just choose the desktop. I'll click Save. And now I get this dialog box. Now if I change my mind, I can pick a different format from right up here. Or I can even choose to export multiple formats. For example, if I wanted to export both a WAV and an MP3 file, I can select MP3. And there are a couple of options down here that might be of interest to you as well. Under looping mode, you can determine what happens to the tail end of audio that loops. What this means is that you might have a track where the tail end of a sound fades out beyond the end of the song, or the point where it loops back to the beginning. Use this menu to determine how to treat that sound. You can choose to leave the remainder, which will let the note end naturally. You can cut the remainder, which cuts the sound off abruptly on the last beat, or wrap remainder. Wrap remainder will actually put the remainder of the end of the sound at the beginning of the track, which won't really be useful unless you plan on making the exported sound a loop. And I'll keep it on leave remainder. Now, if you're exporting a WAV file, you can also choose the bit depth of the WAV. If you're planning on burning the WAV to an audio CD, you can leave it at 16-bit, which is the highest quality format that's compatible with CDs. If you're planning on incorporating the WAV file into another audio project, choose 32-bit float. The only reason to choose 24-bit is if the program you're bringing the file into doesn't support 32-bit float. And if you're exporting an MP3 or an OGG file, you can choose the bit rate with this slider. 160 kilobits per second is generally the point where the audio file is around CD quality. Very few people can tell the difference between an MP3 at 160 and an actual CD. If you're one of the people who can, or thinks you can always up the bit rate to, say, 224. Just remember that the higher the bit rate, the larger the file size. So if you're exporting an MP3, you're probably concerned with file size, so you might want to experiment to find the balance between file size and audio quality. The only other option I want to point out here is split mixer tracks. This is useful if you want to export each track of your project as an individual audio file. With this option selected, each track will become a WAV file. So I'll have a WAV file for the kick drum, one for the clap, one for the hi-hat, one for the snare, and so on. Exported individual files from the same project are often referred to as stems. Now this is useful if you want to bring the files into another program that's not compatible with FL Studio. But okay, so I've selected WAV and MP3 as my export options. I'll click Start. And it may take a few seconds to a few minutes for FL Studio to process and export your song. But since this is just a short project, it finished before I even finished my last sentence. And if I go look on my desktop, there's the WAV file, and there's the MP3 version. So again, if you want a version of the file to email to someone that can be played on just about any audio application, you'll want to choose MP3. If you want the highest quality uncompressed version to burn to a CD or otherwise review, choose the WAV format. But you do have other export options available if you need to select a different format or create a backup of your entire project.